Howdy, y'all. Namaste, and welcome back to IDIS1250, Intro to Sustainability Studies, a Quest for Harmony. We have a new member of the family, a new member of the farm here to introduce Miss Rennie. Rennie, you want to come say hi? Come here, Rennie. This is Rennie. Hi, Rennie. Rennie's 12 weeks old this week. And constantly going to the bathroom inside because, she's 12 weeks old. German Shepherd. So, welcome to week 2 of the course. And let's go ahead and dive right in. So, week 2, we only have one chapter this week. Click over here and go to week 2, Defining Sustainability. We've got another TED Talk, this time by Majora Carter, and another documentary, but this one short and, I promise, much more upbeat documentary, In Love with a Problem. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. So I'm calling this chapter, or I've called this chapter, Flipping the Lens, a Double-Beryl Introduction to Systems Thinking and Sustainability. So, introduction. Changing the world requires us to change our perspective. A perspective shift as transformative as flipping a magnifying glass to see beyond the immediate and into the interconnected. My goal in this chapter is to help you see how sustainable thinking differs from, unsustainable thinking. Before we can change our behaviors, our policies, actions, and ethics, we have to change our patterns of thinking about the world around us and about our place within it. Now, when I was writing my doctoral dissertation, I became fascinated with a book entitled On the Beryl Stone, written by Nicholas of Cusa in 1453, or at least he started in 1453. A beryl stone is simply a piece of quartz. In this text, Nicholas of Cusa describes a concave, right? So it's like a quartz, but it's concave quartz crystal that serves as a magnifying lens. When you look through the lens, it magnifies whatever you're looking at. So you can see tiny things more clearly, like the leg of an ant, for an example. And as Cusa explains, you can take the same exact lens, the lens that magnifies things, and you can flip it over, which basically turns the concave lens into a convex lens. Now, photographers will recognize these two lenses as telephoto and fisheye. You can't just flip the lens on a camera, of course. But instead of zooming in on the ant so that we can see the fine micro details, the lens now does the exact opposite. It zooms out so that we can see the ant within its wider macro context. Creating a more sustainable future requires us to think differently than generations before us have thought. We need to shift from a more analytical modes of thought to systems thinking. In other words, we need to flip the beryl stone over and zoom out so that we can see that everything around us is interconnected. The micro details still matter, to be sure, but when we widen our perspective, we begin to see that the details matter in ways that we hadn't even begun to imagine. So in this chapter, we're going to embark on a brief journey through the history of sustainability studies, a journey that quite literally entails zooming out from the trees to see the forest of the future. Our themes will focus on systems thinking and the 3 pillars of sustainability, namely ecology, economy, and social equity. We will see how sustainability challenges are intertwined and how addressing them effectively requires integrated approaches that consider the interplay of environmental, economic, and social factors. So, first let's do a little bit of history. History and definition of sustainability. Forest for the future. This is me in 17th century England. So imagine you're a shipbuilder in 17th century England. Your livelihood depends on a steady supply of sturdy oak timbers for the Royal Navy's mighty fleet. But the forests are shrinking, the trees are being felled faster than they can regrow, and a shortage of timber looms, threatening not just your business, but the very security of the nation. This was the dilemma facing John Evelyn, a scholar and passionate advocate for trees. In 1664, he published Sylvia, a discourse of forest trees, a groundbreaking work that urged a new approach to forest management based on the concept of sustainability. Now, Evelyn argued that each generation is non sibi soli natus, Latin for not born for itself, but instead born for posterity, as Grover points out. He called for a new spirit of industry among landowners to ensure the providential planting and discretion in felling trees to safeguard resources for the future. His call for sustainable use was echoed a few decades later in Germany by Hans Karl von Carlowitz, great name, who coined the term nachhaltende Nutzung.
Nachhaltende Nutzung.
Exactly what I said, which is German for sustainable use. Now, in his 1713, he wrote that in his 1713 book, Silvicultura Economica, which is Latin for, the economic cultivation of trees. Von Carlowitz, not exactly pictured here, but von Carlowitz, a mining administrator in Saxony, Germany, faced a similar crisis. The region's booming mining industry was rapidly depleting the forests needed for timber to fuel its smelters. His solution, instead of clear-cutting every tree, harvest some, leave some to mature, and then plant new trees to replace the ones that you cut down to ensure a continuous supply for future generations. Genius. These early calls for sustainability were driven by a pragmatic concern for ensuring the availability of resources for future generations, a theme that continues to resonate within sustainability discourse today. Listening to the Silent Spring. Let's fast forward to the mid-20th century. The world is celebrating the post-World War II economic boom, fueled by technological innovation and the seemingly limitless promise of better living through chemistry. But in 1962, biologist Rachel Carson, in her groundbreaking book Silent Spring, shattered this illusion of progress by revealing the hidden costs of our chemical dependence. Through meticulous scientific research and compelling storytelling, Carson exposed the dangers of pesticide, particularly DDT, showing how these toxins, which were originally developed as chemical weapons during World War II in Germany, were accumulating in the environment and poisoning wildlife, ecosystems, and even human breast milk. Carson made the public aware of the interconnectedness for the natural world and the far-reaching consequences of human actions. She wrote, "For the first time in the history of the world, every human being is now subjected to contact with dangerous chemicals, from the moment of conception until death. In the less than 2 decades of their use, the synthetic pesticides have been so thoroughly distributed throughout the animate and inanimate world that they occur virtually everywhere," she wrote in 1962. Carson's work was a catalyst for the modern environmental movement, highlighting the need for environmental regulation, scientific accountability, and public engagement. Her most enduring legacy may be her contribution to system thinking, a framework for understanding the interconnectedness and complexity of the world. Now, turning then to the 1980s, Our Common Future, a global call to action. The 1980s saw a growing recognition that environmental challenges were not just local or national issues, but global in scale. The interconnectedness of ecosystems, economies, and societies was becoming increasingly apparent, demanding a new framework for thinking about development and progress. In 1983, the United Nations established the World Commission on Environment and Development, chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland, a physician and the first female prime minister of Norway. The Commission's task was to develop a global agenda for sustainable development, addressing the interconnected challenges of poverty, environmental degradation, and economic growth. The Brundtland Commission's 1987 report, Our Common Future, popularized the concept of sustainable development, defining it as, quote, this is probably the most famous definition of sustainable development, defining it as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This widely quoted definition emphasizes the interconnectedness of environmental, economic, and social well-being and highlights the importance of intergenerational equity, recognizing the rights of future generations to inherit a healthy and sustainable planet. The Brundtland Report laid the groundwork for the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, a landmark event that brought together world leaders to address global environmental challenges and to commit to a more sustainable future. Section 2, Systems Thinking, a different way of understanding, from events to patterns to structure. We can't, quote, "We can't impose our will upon a system. We can listen to what the system tells us and discover how its properties and our values can work together to bring forth something much better than could ever be produced by our will alone." Those words were written by Donella Meadows in 2008. Let's think about a spider web, glistening with morning dew, each delicate thread connected to others, forming a complex and resilient structure. A slight breeze may cause the web to sway and vibrate, but its intricate design allows it to absorb the disturbance and maintain its integrity. This is a system in action, a dynamic interplay of interconnected parts working together to achieve a common purpose. Systems thinking, like a patient observer of the spiderweb, seeks to understand the relationships between the parts, the feedback loops that regulate the system's behavior, and the emergent properties that arise from the interactions of the components. It recognizes that the web is more than just a collection of threads. It's a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Donella Meadows, a pioneer in systems thinking, pictured here, explains, "Systems fool us by presenting themselves, or we fool ourselves by seeing the world, as a series of events. But in fact, events are the outputs, moment by moment, from the black box of the system." Are you squeaking? In other words, we fool ourselves into thinking that we can understand individual causes and effects in complex systems. However, through careful scientific study, data analysis, experimentation, and observation, scientists develop a deeper understanding of the system's structure, the interconnected elements and feedback loops that give rise to its behavior. This deeper understanding allows us to see the relationships between causes and effects as parts of a complex web rather than a straightforward chain. Leverage points are places within a system where a small change can have a significant impact on the system's behavior. Meadows describes leverage points as, quote, "places within a complex system, whether it's a corporation or economy, a living body, a city, or an ecosystem, where a small shift in one thing can produce big changes in everything." She cautions, however, that, quote, "our leverage points are not intuitive and that we tend to intervene in systems at low leverage points with very little effect." Thus, systems thinking encourages us to look for those places where our actions can have the greatest impacts, where we can leverage our actions even more, recognizing that these may not be the most obvious or intuitive places to intervene. I looked for a lot of different graphics to try and illustrate leverage points, and I kind of dug this one from Both Brains Required, which is a great blog on sustainability studies. And as you can see, the leverage point is this little triangle leverage point here, and depending on where you apply pressure, if you put the leverage point way down there, and you apply effort down here, then a smaller change can have a bigger impact on the system. The better we understand complex adaptive systems, and the better we get at systems thinking, the more effective we can become. We will be less likely to waste time, energy, and resources intervening in systems in inappropriate or even counterproductive ways. On the other hand, as we improve our systems thinking, we improve our ability to make meaningful, impactful changes in systems through relatively small changes at key leverage points. Feedback loops, the system's self-regulation. Donella Meadows and other leading systems thinkers emphasize the importance of understanding feedback loops. Now, feedback loops are the mechanisms by which systems regulate themselves. These feedback loops can either be balancing, working to maintain a system in a stable state, or they can be reinforcing, amplifying change, and driving the systems towards growth or towards collapse. It could go in either direction. For example, desertification feedback loops are self-reinforcing processes that accelerate land degradation in arid and semi-arid regions. As vegetation cover decreases due to factors like overgrazing or climate change, soil erosion increases, which therefore reduces the land's ability to support plant growth. This in turn leads to further loss of vegetation, creating a positive feedback loop. The process also affects regional climate, as reduced vegetation cover alters surface albedo, which is like its ability to absorb light and heat, and decreases moisture recycling through evapotranspiration, potentially suppressing precipitation. Okay, I didn't think that that was sufficiently clear, and it's a very important point. So I made an edit to the text, and let's go through that now. So I think the first part's pretty clear, right? Desertification feedback loops. Desertification feedback loops are self-reinforcing processes that accelerate land degradation in arid and semi-arid regions. As vegetation cover decreases due to factors like overgrazing or climate change, soil erosion increases, reducing the land's ability to support plant growth. Then here's the feedback loop, right? So this leads to the further loss of vegetation, creating a positive feedback loop. The process also affects the regional climate, right? So you've got a local feedback loop occurring, but then that can also affect the regional climate. How does that happen? That happens because this process also affects regional climate, as reduced vegetation cover alters the surface albedo. So the albedo you can see here is basically how much heat and lights and how much energy is reflected back, right? Based on the color, really, of the land, the light spectrum absorbed by that area. So the darker the color, the more of the light spectrum is going to be absorbed, right? So albedo is an expression of the ability of surfaces to reflect sunlight or heat from the sun. Light-colored surfaces return a large part of the sun rays back to the atmosphere, high albedo. Dark surfaces absorb the rays from the sun, low albedo. This is why white clothes keep you cooler in the sunlight and why darker colors keep you warmer in the sunlight. By the way, like, all of this should be in quotations. There, now it's properly cited. The source where I got that, which is a great source. That's where I also got these images, so please click there if you want to learn more. But anyway, this is why, right? This is why white clothes keep you cooler in the sunlight and why darker colors keep you warmer in the sunlight. So as a result of the lower albedo, the surface is hotter, which decreases moisture recycling through evapotranspiration, you know, everyday kind of word there, thereby suppressing precipitation. So I've got here also a link to global desertification, which you can click if you want to see, you know, these feedback loops. This is just an intro course and there's so much to cover. So, you know, I'm trying to give you places where you can go to learn more, to go deeper underneath the surface. Anyway, back to me from like 4 hours ago when I started recording. Simply put, we used to think that desertification was caused by decreased rainfall, which, it's not wrong. But now our scientific knowledge helps us to understand that the decreased rainfall is directly connected to the decrease in plants and trees. One causes the other. They both cause each other. That should be in a feedback loop. Both are causes and effects of one another. Fewer trees isn't merely an effect of decreased rainfall. It also causes decreased rainfall. System thinking helps us to shift from linear thinking about causality to a more circular thinking about causal loops that can be balancing or reinforcing. Shifting now to complexity and emergence, embracing uncertainty. Systems thinking recognizes the complexity of the world, systems whose behavior is nonlinear and often unpredictable. Traditional analytical approaches, with their emphasis on linear cause and effect relationships, often fall short in understanding these complex systems. Fritjof Capra, a particle physicist, explains, quote, "Systems thinking means a shift of perception from material objects and structures to the non-material processes and the non-material patterns of organization that represent the very essence of life." Now, that's a difficult quote, not going to lie, but it's certainly worth rereading. What is Capra trying to say here? Analytical thinking is an attempt to dissect things. Right? Like think about the beryl stone, looking through the micro side. Analytical thinking is an attempt to dissect things. Analysis is about breaking something complicated down into simple pieces. As a particle physicist, that is quite literally what Professor Capra's research entailed.
Fritjof Capra.
Systems thinking, however, takes us in the opposite direction. You might even say that it flips the beryl stone. It's not about dissecting an ant, but instead understanding how the ant fits into the ant colony and even into the entire ecosystem that it's in, and how the ant colony fits into its immediate ecological surroundings, and how that entire ant species relates to each other and all of the species in the broader ecosystem, and so on and so forth. As Capra says, it involves a shift in perception. I think it would be worth reading Capra's quote once more because it encapsulates, easy for me to say, it encapsulates the point that I'm trying to make in this unit and in the next chapter, which is a deeper dive into systems thinking and why it is so fundamental to our study of sustainability. So let's look at his quote again. Systems thinking means a shift of perception. As we change our ways of thinking from analytical thinking to systems thinking, we are also changing where our attention is focused. That is what Capra means by a shift of perception. Our gaze shifts away from the individual parts of a system, the material objects and structures, as Capra puts it.
Fritjof Capra.
But what does our attention shift towards? Capra tells us that our perception turns towards things like processes and patterns. It's a shift from micro to macro. We still pay attention to the individuals within a system, for sure, but most of our attention now is devoted to understanding how all of the ecological puzzle pieces fit together. As we will see in the next chapter, one of the key characteristics of complex thinking is something that's commonly referred to as emergence. Emergence describes the arising or the emerging of novel and coherent structures, patterns, and properties from the interactions of smaller components. As we will explore throughout this course, highly complex systems often display behaviors or characteristics that cannot be predicted or explained just by analyzing their parts, right? Because the whole is more than just the sum of its parts, but can only be glimpsed by paying attention to the complex interplay of the components. Emergent properties are defined as the characteristics or behaviors that arise from the complex interactions of simpler components within a system, but are not present in or predictable from the individual components themselves. Important definition there. Let me read it again. Emergent properties are characteristics or behaviors that arise from the complex interactions of simpler components within a system, but are not present in or predictable from the individual components themselves. So again, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Conscious thought, for instance, is an emergent property of the context within the context of neuroscience. While individual neurons are not conscious on their own, per se, the intricate interplay of billions of neurons in the brain gives rise to the experience of conscious phenomena. Now, this occurrence emerges from the collective behavior of neurons firing, forming networks, and the processing information in ways that cannot be fully explained by studying the individual neurons in isolation. The complex patterns of neuronal activity, including the integration of sensory inputs, memory formation, and decision-making processes, collectively contribute to the emergence of conscious experiences that are qualitatively different from the properties of individual neurons. This perspective helps us understand why Capra says that processes and patterns of organization that system thinking helps us to perceive represent the very essence of life.
Fridge off Capra.
Next section, diversity, resilience, and sustainability. As we will see in the next chapter, Professor Scott Page emphasizes the importance of diversity in complex systems. He demonstrates how diverse collections of problem solvers with their different perspectives, knowledge, and heuristics can outperform groups of the best individuals on complex tasks. He writes, if the individuals are diverse in how they represent the problem, how they generate candidate solutions, or how they evaluate the candidate solutions, then the group can outperform its best member. In other words, the group can outperform even its best member. Diversity, I guess it wasn't really other words, was it? Diversity provides a system with a wider range of responses to changing circumstances, making it more adaptable and resilient. As we will see in the next chapter, this is every bit as true in team performance as it is in investment portfolio diversification. The diversity bonus, as Page calls it, is an emergent property of every complex system which promotes innovation by bringing together different perspectives and ideas. Systems thinking, which trains our attention on the interconnectedness, the feedback loops, the complexity, the emergency, and diversity, provides a powerful framework for understanding and addressing sustainability challenges. It helps us to see the world as a web of relationships, recognizing the unintended consequences of our actions, and develop integrated solutions that consider the long-term well-being of the whole system. Moving now to section 3, the 3 pillars of sustainability. A balancing act. The concept of sustainability is often represented by the metaphor of 3 pillars, which I've mentioned before: environment, economy, and equity. These 3 pillars, which are also known as the 3 E's or the 3 P's, people, planet, and profit, represent the interconnected dimensions of sustainable society. The triple bottom line, a phrase popularized by John Elkington, emphasizes that for an organization or society to be truly sustainable, it must consider not only its economic performance, but also its social and environmental impacts. A common visual representation of the 3 pillars is a Venn diagram with 3 overlapping circles, which is what a Venn diagram is. The area where the environment and social circles overlap represents bearable conditions, where social well-being and environmental health are both maintained. The overlap between the social and economic circles represents equitable conditions, where economic opportunity and social justice are balanced. The overlap between the environmental and economic circles represents viable conditions, where economic activity is environmentally sustainable. Finally, the area where all 3 circles overlap represents what we call sustainable conditions, where all 3 pillars are in harmony. Systems thinking is essential for understanding the 3 pillars of sustainability because it recognizes these pillars are not isolated entities, but rather interconnected parts of a larger dynamic system. Changes in one pillar inevitably affect the others, often in unpredictable ways. Which is why maybe the Venn diagram is a better metaphor than the pillar diagram, since they quite separate there. Ecosystem thinking, recognizing limits and interconnections. Ecosystem thinking means learning to think in a way that mimics the way that ecosystems operate. In other words, the more that you and I learn about the complex balance and harmony that sustain the creatures, cycles, and processes within an ecosystem, the more that knowledge changes how we think. Ecosystems thinking requires us to consider how life flows through species, how life animates the system as a whole, in an intricate dance of give and take, cooperation, mutuality, and competitive efficiency. Ecosystem thinking recognizes that the Earth is a finite system with limits, and that human activities must operate within those limits if we hope to create a sustainable future. It emphasizes the importance of understanding ecological processes such as energy flow, nutrient cycling, and biodiversity, and how these processes contribute to the resilience and sustainability of ecosystems. By observing the natural world and listening attentively to biologists, botanists, geologists, entomologists, and other scientists, we can begin to think differently. We can begin to think in ways that are less egocentric and more ecocentric. We can begin to think in a way that mimics the way ecosystems behave. Scholars and advocates of sustainability have long insisted that a keystone of sustainable practice is biomimicry. Biomimicry entails learning from and imitating nature's designs and processes to create more sustainable solutions. By studying how nature solves problems, we can develop innovative technologies and strategies that work in harmony with the natural world. Janine Benyus, author of Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature from 1997, has said, quote, "After 3.8 billion years of research and development, failures are fossils, and what surrounds us is the secret to survival." Throughout this course, and particularly in Units 3 and 4, we will examine the idea of biomimicry from the perspective of all three E's: ecology, economics, and social equity. For now, let's take notice of Benyus's use of the phrase research and development. Business owners and corporations devote millions of dollars and hours investing in research and development to discover new efficiencies. As Benyus and the biomimicry movement that she pioneered point out, the history of evolution is also the history of trial, error, adaptation, and innovation. Rather than attempting to develop new technologies from scratch, wise leaders pay attention to the natural world and often benefit from mimicking the solutions that nature has been working on for millions of years. For example, the design of wind turbine blades that are more efficient because they mimic the bumps on a humpback whale's fin is an example of biomimicry. The ecologics of economics, from linear to circular. The ecologics of economics challenges the prevailing paradigm of unlimited economic growth on a finite planet, recognizing that the current economic system, based on the extraction of resources, the production of goods, and the generation of waste, is inherently unsustainable. This linear model of take, make, waste depletes resources, pollutes the environment, and generates vast quantities of waste. Quote, "The organism is not a static system closed to the outside and always containing the identical components. It's an open system in a quasi-steady state in which material continually enters from and leaves into the outside environment."
Berta Lanfi.
So in other words, a more sustainable approach is the circular economy, modeled on natural ecosystems, where waste from one process becomes food for another, and materials cycle continuously. So again, biomimicry, following the ecologic of the ecology. In a circular economy, products are designed for durability, repairability, and recyclability, and resources are reused and repurposed rather than discarded and tossed into a landfill. The basic pattern of life is a network pattern capable of self-organization. This is a simple definition, yet it is based on recent discoveries at the forefront of science. Quoting again,
Fritjof Capra.
Capra, who's a particle physicist, that you'll recall. Here we've got an image of the linear economy, taking raw materials, designing them, manufacturing, consuming them, and then just throwing them into a landfill, and then repeat the process, which is obviously not sustainable long term. Whereas a circular economy takes those same raw materials and designs them and manufactures them and consumes them and maintains them in a way that can be reused and recycled and repeated. The circular economy requires a shift in thinking from a focus on individual products to a focus on systems and flows. It involves rethinking traditional business models, designing for disassembly and reuse, and creating closed-loop systems where materials circulate continuously. Quoting Capra again.
Fritjof Capra.
Quote, "The fundamental dilemma underlying the major problems of our time seems to be the illusion that perpetual economic growth is possible. It is the result of a clash between linear reductionist thinking and the nonlinear patterns of our biosphere, the ecological networks and cycles that constitute the web of life. Equity, a just and equitable future. A sustainable society is one that satisfies its needs without diminishing the prospects of future generations." Echoing the Brundtland definition that we saw earlier in this chapter. Equity, the third pillar or circle in our Venn diagram of sustainability, recognizes that a sustainable future must be a just and equitable one. It addresses issues of social justice, environmental justice, and intergenerational equity, ensuring that all people have equal access to resources, opportunities, and a healthy environment. The 2020 COVID-19 pandemic laid bare the stark inequities in our world, as vulnerable populations, including low-income communities and communities of color, were disproportionately impacted by the virus and its consequences. This pandemic, with its origins in an imbalanced ecosystem, highlighted the interconnectedness of environmental health, social justice, and economic well-being. Quoting the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, quote, "The issues we face demand sustained effort and insight from a broad array of people who bring a variety of perspectives, backgrounds, and knowledge to experiences to the challenge." The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, adopted in 2015, provide a framework for addressing these interconnected challenges, aiming to end poverty and hunger, promote health and well-being, achieve quality education, promote gender equality, ensure clean water and sanitation, promote sustainable energy, foster economic growth and decent work, reduce inequality, build sustainable cities and communities, promote responsible consumption and production, combat climate change, conserve and sustainably use the oceans and marine resources, protect and restore terrestrial ecosystems, promote peace, justice, and strong institutions, and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development, all by the year 2030. Very ambitious goal. The SDGs recognize that achieving a sustainable future requires a multifaceted approach that addresses the root causes of poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation. Critically, we must also recognize and respect the knowledge and wisdom of indigenous peoples who have lived in harmony with the earth for millennia, their cultures and traditions embodying deep ecological understanding and sustainable practices. Indigenous knowledge systems offer valuable insights into how to live within the limits of Earth's carrying capacity, conserve biodiversity, and manage resources sustainably. Quoting Chief Oren Lyons from the Onondaga Nation, we'll hear from him in a video later this semester. Quote, "We are the original caretakers of Mother Earth. We have a responsibility to protect her for future generations. Our traditional knowledge is essential for creating a sustainable future. Unfortunately, our current global society is rife with inequity, as those with wealth and privilege consume a disproportionate share of resources and generate the lion's share of pollution, while vulnerable populations, including indigenous communities, often bear the brunt of environmental degradation and climate change. Building a more equitable future requires a recognition of these inequities and a commitment to social justice. It involves sharing resources more fairly, empowering marginalized communities, and creating a world where all people have equal access to opportunities and a healthy environment.
What's next?
The social ecology model, Double-Beryl.
Whoa.
The three pillars of sustainability, environment, economy, and equity provide a solid foundation for understanding the interconnectedness of sustainability challenges. But sometimes this framework can feel a bit abstract and impersonal, especially when we're trying to figure out what we can do to make a difference. The social ecology model, developed by Professor Stuart Hill, addresses this challenge by explicitly incorporating the personal dimension into the sustainability framework. It recognizes that sustainability is not just about global treaties and corporate policies, it's also about the choices that we make in our everyday lives, the values that we hold, and the actions that you and I take. The social ecology model reframes the traditional three-sector model by folding economic considerations into the social sphere, recognizing that economic activity is ultimately a social endeavor. It then adds a fourth, which is really the third sphere, the personal, to highlight the importance of individual values, beliefs, and actions in shaping a sustainable future. This model encourages us to consider the interconnectedness of environment, society, and our personal lives, and to recognize that our individual actions have ripple effects that extend outwards, impacting the well-being of the whole. As Mulligan writes, the social ecology model helps to bring the personal into view, and this has strong pedagogical merit. Pedagogical meaning related to teaching, educational. So again, just want to emphasize that it's not that the economic has fallen out here, it's that the economic has been folded into the social, because economic is a social science. Remember the barrel stone metaphor that we introduced earlier?
I'll put it in my notes.
While sustainability thinking encourages us to zoom out with a convex lens to see the larger systems within which we operate, the social ecology model reminds us to occasionally flip the barrel back to its concave orientation and zoom in on ourselves. Because what makes complex systems truly complex is the individuality of their components, the unique characteristics, experiences, values, and choices of each person, of each creature, or of each entity. Our individual actions, combined with the actions of millions of others, shape the behavior of the whole system. Thus, the social ecology model, by bringing the personal into the equation, encourages a more holistic understanding of sustainability, recognizing that individual transformation is essential for creating a truly sustainable world.
Wrap it up.
4. Conclusion. The forest for the trees. In this chapter, we've taken a first step into the expansive and dynamic field of sustainability studies. Like explorers setting out on a journey, we've begun to map the terrain, discovering landmarks, identifying key concepts, and recognizing the interconnectedness of the journey ahead. We've learned about some early thinkers who urged sustainable practices, from John Evelyn's 17th century call to protect forests for future generations, to Rachel Carson's 20th century expose on the far-reaching consequences of chemical poisons in our water, food, and breast milk. We've explored the concept of sustainable development, emphasizing intergenerational equity and recognizing the rights of future generations to inherit a healthy planet. Most importantly, we've been introduced to the power of systems thinking, a framework that helps us to see the world as a web of interconnected relationships. We've learned about feedback loops, emergent properties, and the importance of diversity, recognizing that what makes complex systems truly complex is the dynamic interplay of their diverse components. We've also seen how the three pillars of sustainability, environment, economy, and equity, are interconnected, and how this social ecology model, with its inclusion of the personal dimension, brings these abstract concepts closer to home, flipping the barrel both ways. Let's return once more to the image of the beryl stone, which helps us to see the micro and the macro, so long as we remember to flip it. To navigate the complex terrain of sustainability, we need to be able to do both. Zoom out with a convex lens to see the forest, the interconnectedness of systems, and flip the barrel to its concave side to zoom in on the trees, the unique contributions and responsibilities of individuals like you and like me and the honeybee.
That feels random.
Now, this chapter is just the beginning of our exploration. Over the coming chapters, we will dive more deeply into these key concepts, examining their implications for creating a more sustainable and equitable future. So buckle up. The journey ahead is full of challenges, but it's also full of hope and the promise of creating a world where both the forest and the trees can flourish for generations to come. So that does it for chapter 1. Next, I'd like you to watch the TED Talk by Majora Carter from 2006 called Greening the Ghetto, which is about 18 minutes long. And then after that, watch this documentary. It's just 22 minutes long, called In Love with a Problem, about these two young women who have developed a process for dealing with plastic. So filled with lots of hope and good things. I hope you enjoy both of them. And I look forward to your nature journal after that. Hope you're enjoying the course, and I look forward to meeting individually with each one of you very shortly, if I haven't already. Word. Peace out. You want to say goodbye? Goodbye. 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 You want to say goodbye? You want to sit there? Say goodbye?